Right, hello, welcome to the Moirai appropriation. This is episode 29. It's been a while since I've put anything up on this channel, and this will also be the first time that I'm going to have to put a sort of separate playlist together to be able to stick it up on use censorship, but we'll see how that one goes. So in the unlikely event that somebody only watches videos on the Moirai appropriation rather than the main channel, the Sisyphus complex solution, I say apologies for not putting something up for a while, but you know, these things happen. So in terms of this particular episode, I've raised the code of conduct as a route to recourse against MPs for quite some time, and it's not just actually MPs, and that it's anybody that works within the public sector. And in the main, the response that I've been getting from people is that it either won't do anything or it can't be used in the way that I suggest. And in terms of the way that I suggest, I've predominantly used it in terms of saying that it would be a route to recourse in order to be able to gain some level of conviction that would then enable triggering a recall. So I'm going to kind of go through what the actual situation is, and that's so that this can be explained as best it can be, really. I can do this because I've been having some backwards and forwards with the specific Office of the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards, and so now I'm going to kind of sort of build out my case and then show some of the responses that I've been getting from them. So ideally what this means is that when people ask me questions, I can just refer them to this video rather than me having to keep repeating myself all the time. So if we look at the code itself, and like I said, as much as this is supposed to be based around the conduct for MPs, understand that there is very similar documents that apply across the whole of the public sector. So my main focus when it comes down to this code of conduct is on the section, what's known as Section C, the 7 principles in public life. And rather than do absolutely everything for you, and that there's links in the description to all of this stuff, and you can read the details of Section D and Section E for yourself, because that is stuff that is a little bit more comprehensive in terms of, you know, bribery, certain types of influence that are deemed unworthy, this type of situation. You can have a look at that yourself, because that side of things is not really the problem. It's the principles of public life that is where the real situation needs to be taken into consideration. And even more than the 7 principles of public life, I very much focus down on the obligation towards honesty. We can have certain areas of subjectivity on other areas, but honesty is one way you can really start to narrow down. So the problem comes in when we start to look at the document, which is the procedural protocol in respect to the code of conduct, and the waters get very much muddied with this type of statement. What the Commissioner cannot investigate, and specifically stating that he won't investigate allegations against the principles of public life. That is retarded. You have a code of conduct whereby the very first set of principles that are set out are then being discarded. That makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. So what I did was I had 3 communications backwards and forwards with the office, and I'll show you what they were now, because there are certainly issues. Right, I'm going to show this evidence slightly out of order, but I'll explain why. And this first one that's on the screen is the second response that I had, whereby my inquiry is very much based on, for them to be able to provide specific metrics in their statement around taking these principles, these 7 principles, into account at least. You can't just turn around and have that as some kind of an abstract statement. You have to have specified metrics or an understanding as to what level you're going to be applying to each particular aspect of those 7 principles. And again, I will focus down on honesty. So you could, as an example, you could say, well, somebody's just said a little white lie. It wasn't particularly overly intentional. It certainly hasn't done any harm. Are we going to be spurious and start taking up all manner of complaints about a little white lie? Probably not. We'll say, all right, naughty boy, don't do that again, but we're not going any further. But then you have to take that right the way through to saying an absolute egregious lie that has caused considerable harm. These are the kinds of metrics that could be stipulated, and these people have refused to actually give any kind of indication as to what those metrics might be. What they have done is they've given certain indicators as to how this might actually be addressed. So in this second response that I had, I've put the highlight around the fact that they claim that there's a public consultation. That becomes an important part for us to take into consideration. So then the third response that I got, again, they're not answering the question that I've asked about the metrics. It does double down on this section D and E, and therefore completely ignoring section C, which is what I'm most interested in. And they're giving links through to other documents whereby I already know what is written within it, and it doesn't answer my fundamental question. And it is a legal question. So now I'm going to go back to the first response that I got. And this is the part where we need to be paying attention. Because the first thing is the statement of how there is usually a consultation once during each Parliament. So that's a consultation on how the Code of Conduct will be applied, and potentially who will apply it. That's also something to be keeping in mind. There was a link in the response that I've put in the description as well, in terms of how the previous consultation took place, and that was conducted in 2022. What that means is we should be having another one. You can't say that you usually have a consultation in each Parliament and then not have a consultation in this Parliament. So if you check the link for yourself, well, there's no need for me to run through that particular part for you, because it is pretty much as you'd expect, because you'll find the same old problem that we always come across with these consultations, and that's the fact that the only people taking part in it are the very people who would benefit from ignoring things like Section C. So you've got their legal buddies and then the MPs themselves, who of course don't want to be held to account. So again, keep in mind that of all of this, we really do need to be focusing down on honesty above all, because I think the metrics for honesty and that are the easiest ones to be able to apply. They're certainly, as far as I'm concerned, the highest priority amongst the principles. You can argue that if you like. If you have something that you think would be more effective, by all means let me know. I don't have a problem with that, as long as there are metrics involved. So what this does mean then is that we do need to be making a push for a new consultation. And then once we're making the push for the consultation, we need to actually take part in it. Same old story, nothing happens unless you actually make it happen. So the office also did claim a possible point of interest within the annual report. So let's have a quick look at that supposed area of interest. Now, apparently the interest that they want me to take into account here, and that I'm supposed to be impressed by, is another statement by the Commissioner himself of merely taking into account the 7 principles in public life, and that somehow doing some seminars with MP staff is good enough to be able to comply with those 7 principles being actually conducted in some form within a parliamentary or a public setting, to say, well, you shouldn't lie. I mean, it's a bit of a short seminar, isn't it? Let everybody turns up and has nice drinks and a snack, and they say, well, try not to lie, eh? Not entirely sure what level of seminar is required for something like that, but point being, excuse me, Mr. Commissioner, for not being impressed with this. So that then kind of begs the question as to who we're talking about in terms of this person that sits as the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards. So I think it's worth us knowing who it is that we're talking about. Meet Mr. Daniel Greenberg. And immediately I can hear a chorus in the background of going, the Jews. I don't care about things like that. Suffice to say, from his own website, he does go on a lot about being Jewish. But then at the same time, I do have to wonder why the main photo that he's decided to choose for his website has him, that's Hoyle fella, who's the Speaker of the House, basically the only other white person there. And if you remember the Speaker of the House that was so cowed by threats from Muslims that he changed parliamentary procedure. And he's the only other one, the only other white person stood in this particular photograph. Otherwise than that, you're basically pushing a picture where it's go, oh, look at how many Pakistanis and Indians that I've managed to get into the frame. I'm perhaps not entirely convinced that we're dealing with somebody that has got the best interests of the country at heart. If this is the kind of photograph that you think is the ideal one to be putting up to promote yourself on your own website, questions, shall we say. So nevertheless, what we do get is a claim of him being a legal expert, and apparently he also lectures on legal matters at the University of London. Not so keen on that. Now, the law is actually not supposed to be arbitrary, hence why I've asked for the metrics. And even though you might be forgiven for thinking that it's under constant examples of what's clearly a two-tier system in the legal system at the moment, and a lot of it is based on nothing more than ideology, when we're dealing with somebody that is claiming to be a legal expert and that cannot provide metrics for the legal opinion, and instead giving documents that effectively amount to, I'll think about it, I tend to think that the so-called legal expertise here is expertise in avoidance of actual legal practice. I think anybody looking at this guy and that would be forgiven for thinking, I don't necessarily trust what's going on here. And the legal system has to be based on trust and the confidence of the public. This is not a great display of that as far as I'm concerned. So what we are looking at then is if when you have somebody that is in this position and that is going to be in a prime position for route to recourse against those people that would be dishonest towards the public, I would suggest that we're dealing with somebody that's got or should raise some legitimate concerns as to his competence in order to be able to hold this office. The thing is, though, and that is that we do have metrics within law to back up the kind of complaints that would, again, be very much focused towards honesty, and that would ensure that if we were to take part in a new consultation, that we could quite strongly appeal on a proper fundamental legal basis as to why Section C of the Code of Conduct absolutely must be restored to its rightful place rather than an afterthought. And here's where the potential remedies come into play. Because when you're dealing with something around the Code of Conduct and the remedies that are available to us as a result of that. So if somebody is found to have been egregiously guilty, for example, of some kind of failure of the Code of Conduct, you then get a charge of misconduct in public office. So the part that this Mr. Greenberg seems to have missed in his failure to understand that there are metrics, all we have to do then is take a look at the actual charge and the legal position of misconduct in public office. The first thing to understand is that there are metrics again within misconduct in public office, because there are metrics in so much as the penalties that can be received, and it goes all the way up to imprisonment for life. So we are dealing with something that can be exceptionally serious, and it is on the legislative books. So we're not talking about something that is based on I'll think about it. This has standing. And then when you do understand that you're dealing with something that can lead to misconduct in public office, lo and behold, it does actually include dishonesty. Perhaps his time at University of London and that just didn't quite enable him to actually bother to look at this patently obvious route to recourse. And so by default, the level of dishonesty would require a metric within the Code of Conduct, because it would enable a charge of misconduct in public office. It is not something that can be ignored. Like I say, presumably old Mr. I've got friends and none of them are English. Perhaps that collective expertise hasn't stretched to how far this bleeding obvious link is. This kind of knowledge is exactly why my question was based around asking 3 times, giving them the chance 3 times to provide me with the metrics. Legitimate question. For these people to have failed 3 times to have answered is not acceptable. Now, when we're talking about this kind of thing, it's not just a matter of somebody lying in the form of some kind of an exaggeration or what might be considered dishonesty via omission. Not entirely anyway. It all comes down to the willful nature of the lying. And then what is the actual consequences of that lie, even a lie by omission. So like I say, it should have some level of gradient here. Because the thing about that is that when somebody in public office intentionally lies, and the result of that lie is to cause actual physical harm, or to even result in unlawful incarceration or any other violation of rights, then this is something that should be subject to misconduct in public office. And it should be the route of recourse through the Code of Conduct. It shouldn't be a difficult thing for people to understand. So like I say, the scale of the punishment is dependent on the level of harm that is evidenced. So we're not talking about spurious or frivolous claims. We're talking about things that can be evidenced with actual consequences. At one level, we could use the example of each and every minister that is directly lying to the public about the impacts of their climate change policies. And the obvious example there, and that is to say that, oh, your bills will be cheaper. You vote for me, I'm going to get into office and that, and your bills will be cheaper and everything is going to be all hunky-dory. And then the exact opposite happens. And not only does the exact opposite happen, but it results in actual deaths through energy poverty. That would definitely be lying, having actual physical harms as a consequence, and definitely deserve violation of the Code of Conduct, charge of misconduct in public office. Potentially the highest penalty, because it has resulted in actual deaths. Now, obviously there's lots of people that would then get caught up in this, but then their fault, isn't it? Don't make idiot claims that you know are going to be completely the opposite, because they do know it's going to be the opposite, and there is absolutely no basis for that argument to be made in the first place. Now, when you have those kind of lies, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect somebody to then just rot in prison for what effectively have been. Could it be considered to be a charge of murder? You start off with misconduct in public office, the charges could very well increase dependent on what the actual result of that lie was, and the willful lying. But we have to start with the route to recourse that is going to be available to the public. There is also another charge, which I'm not going to go into in any great detail here, and that because I don't think it's really necessary. But if we are dealing with something that is going to be towards the higher end of the punishment scale, you then also have something called gross misconduct in public office. I'll say that again because I think I just did a little bit of a tongue twister on myself. The higher charge is gross misconduct in public office. So some clarity as well on that. Now, obviously, like I said, when we're having a consultation or when we're forcing a consultation, we have to be giving great deal of consideration in terms of consequence metrics. What level of lying will result in what level of punishment? Because I know damn well that when you get this situation of saying, I'll think about it, all that means is they're going to be conducting all manner of mental gymnastics in order to be able to have no accountability whatsoever, and then to avoid the level of this route to recourse that is there specifically for the public to hold the representatives to account. That's what it's there for. So, because the current incumbent is plainly not stipulating these metrics, then it then should be a case of the public consultation saying, I don't really think that you're the right person for this role either. You obviously don't understand that this law is there for us, the public, to be able to hold MPs to account on a level that is the term consummate with the crime? Whatever the term is. I think that's about right. But, you know, not doing things on a frivolous basis. I do tend to think that from the annual report that I have seen of the office, I dare say that there could be a bit of, the mental gymnastics going on anyway. But it does seem that they get an awful lot of complaints that go through. But the vast majority of them are quite frivolous. And that's something that we have to be very, very clear about avoiding. Don't give anybody the opportunity to do that sort of thing, because then that will reduce the impact of what it is that we actually need to see being done. So, for me, really, if we are going to make a suggestion that the current commissioner is not fit for purpose here, by simply stating that he'll give consideration and do some seminars about Section C is in and of itself a violation of the 7 principles in public life. So the main point there would be that there's no integrity there. It is not holding his office to the standard that it should be held at. So I want people to understand, to give consideration to what kind of metrics should actually be put in place. I could list something out myself, but I don't think that would be a wise thing. I think it requires a wider conversation, and perhaps having a central body to organise something like this, and then do it in a more kind of official capacity, a more representative of the public capacity, should we say. So what we then need to understand is this about holding account in terms of being able to put MPs in prison? No. There may be that potential for people that are literally out there lying to the extent that it is causing people to die. But the main point around this, and this is where we could come across something like a 3 strikes and you're out kind of system, because in my original statement I've stated that the route to recourse via the code of conduct is something that then can help trigger recall. So let's have a look at the recall again. Here's the 3 conditions of how you actually trigger a recall. At the lower end of any kind of guilt within the charge of misconduct in public office, it would result in a suspension from Parliament. And that suspension of Parliament, it can be decided via the metrics, is very likely to meet the threshold of the 2nd condition. And if I remember rightly, the absence from Parliament can be something like up to 14 days, something like that. It's no more than 14 days. But you can certainly make sure a charge of misconduct in public office results in meeting that threshold. So again, this is why the code of conduct is an important route to recourse, and why we should not allow any form of abuse to prevent us from using this in the manner that it was created, the purpose that it was created for. So the first stage is to demand a new parliamentary consultation for the code of conduct. The second stage is for the public to be highly active in the consultation and not leave it to those people who are seeking to protect their own positions because they keep failing in the 7 principles. The third stage is for us to actively provide specific metrics that we can agree upon. Things that, like I say, have the consequence according to the level of violation. And I would also suggest that consideration be given to retroactive prosecutions. And I say that because then that would include examples like Tony Blair for his lie about the Iraq war as one prime example. And the reason why you'd also want to do that is because of his level of influence into Parliament to this day. If we want accountability from our politicians, we need to make sure that this system of route to recourse is fit for purpose. As things stand, this Daniel Greenberg is failing in that duty. And so, as per usual, it's up to us to make sure that the systems that are there for us work for us. The other part to this, which is also of the greatest importance, is that this is a system where the route to recourse is directly at the individual. So you don't end up with any kind of a Pyrrhic victory. And when I say Pyrrhic victory, I'm talking about people that will try to complain about particular offices of state. And then the recourse that you might be able to get would be something like a compensation package. You may win the case, the ministry may well be found to have committed some kind of violation, then the compensation that you get is punishment to the taxpayer, not to the individuals responsible. This is a route to recourse where you're directly going for the individual responsible. This is actual accountability. When people understand that they are going to be accountable for their own actions, they're less likely to be useful idiots. That's the primary purpose as to why this is the best method for holding people to account and for making use of that recourse system. So I'll say it one more time because I have put this up a few times lately on Twitter. Again, this is one of the methods that you can be using to expand your network, to let people know about consultations that are going to take place, and that that you can create something whereby you can hold your local MP to account. You can hold your local councillors to account. You can hold anybody that works in public office to account. And the better your local network is, that can then be linked up to a national network, the more chance you've got of things working. So, like I say, code of conduct in this instance, this is something that people need to be able to expand that network and really push to make sure that consultation takes place. If I want to take it one step further, you've got the council elections that are coming up in May of 2026. You've now got some time to be able to get your voting blocks together. So, because when I'm talking about developing a network, that network can then become a voting block. Doesn't necessarily mean that within your network that everybody's going to want to vote the same way, but you can determine that for yourself from within your network. But you can create a voting block. That voting block can then have discussion with whichever MP you want, and it doesn't matter which party it is that they're with or whether they're an independent. And you can turn around and say, we will give you our support, ensuring that you've got a good number of people, because otherwise you'll just be ignored. If you've got enough people within your network that would become a very critical and deciding factor in anybody getting elected, you can then also further fortify your position by saying, sign a contract. Because councillors and MPs have no contract of employment. Get them to sign a contract, and within that contract stipulate the metrics for the code of conduct. So that then, if you end up with a situation for any reason that we're not being able to get that parliamentary commissioner to do the job that he is supposed to do, you'll have had a contract in place to fortify it anyway. And it will have a legal standing, because like I say, you do have dishonesty within misconduct. These things do exist. So the main point here is about making people that work in the public sector accountable again, but most especially those people at the highest positions that are causing the most problems. So hopefully that explained my position around the code of conduct. If anybody wants to argue the case again, and for the love of God, please make an actual argument. Don't just say, you can't do that. That's not an answer. That would be the same kind of waste of my time that I got from the Commissioner's office himself. Make an actual case, if you can. Otherwise, I think the public really do need to start pulling their finger out and making sure that we do have these route to recourse systems available to us, so that we can really start to hold people to account. Okay? That's the explanation. Right, I'll see you, probably see the next time on that on the main channel at the weekend. All right, cheers, bye-bye.